A girl student secretly gifted a homeless every year. One Christmas, 2 Bentleys pulled up to her home. Enjoy the story. The neighbors whispered that she was odd, always quiet, always alone. Emily Parker stood at her bedroom window, watching. Snowflakes dance in the December air, each one unique yet destined to disappear without notice. Much like her, she thought. At 16, she wore her second-hand uniform with quiet dignity, its frayed edges matching the worn corners of her spirit. Outside, the Chicago wind howled through the narrow streets of their working-class neighborhood, carrying whispers that never seemed to include her name. Emily's fingers traced the small package on her windowsill, a carefully folded blanket, a thermos of homemade soup, and a dog-eared paperback she'd saved from the school's discard pile. Her adoptive parents, Martha and George Wilson, good people once perhaps, but now weathered by disappointment and routine, would never approve of what she was about to do. Their affection was measured and conditional, like everything else in their cramped apartment, food portioned carefully, heat used sparingly, dreams mentioned never. The clock struck 4. Time to go. Emily tucked the package into her backpack and slipped out quietly, her footsteps barely making a sound on the worn carpet. Martha was busy with her sewing, squinting under the weak lamplight. George wouldn't be home for hours, another late shift at the factory. Neither looked up as she whispered, "Going to study at the library." The bitter cold slapped her face as she stepped outside, but Emily didn't mind. There was freedom in these solitary walks, especially when they had purpose. She made her way, past crowded storefronts decorated with tinsel and lights, past families shopping together, their laughter a language she'd never quite learned to speak. She turned away from the vibrant main street, toward the abandoned train tracks where the city forgot its promises. That's where she found him, same as last year and the year before, a thin man with silver-streaked hair and eyes that carried the weight of untold stories. He sat huddled against the concrete wall, wrapped in layers of mismatched clothes, his posture somehow maintaining dignity despite everything. Most passed by without seeing him at all. Emily had been seeing him since she was 12. "Hello, Mr. Richard," she said softly, approaching with care not to startle him. His weathered face broke into a smile that transformed him. "Emily," he replied, his voice surprisingly refined. "You came again." She knelt beside him, unpacking her gifts with ceremonial care. "I made vegetable soup this time, and I found this book on astronomy. You mentioned the stars last year." Richard accepted each item with graceful hands that seemed to belong to another life. "You are extraordinary," he said simply, wrapping the blanket around his shoulders. "You know that, don't you?" Emily shrugged, uncomfortable with praise she rarely received. "It's not much." "It is everything," he countered, opening the book with reverence. "To be seen when the world has decided you're invisible, that is a miracle." Emily walked home slower than usual that evening, replaying his words. What Richard didn't know was that she understood invisibility too well. At school, she was the quiet girl who blended into walls. At home, she was the obligation Martha and George had fulfilled without enthusiasm. Everywhere, she existed in the periphery of other people's lives. The next day at Lincoln High School, Emily sat alone at lunch as usual, watching her classmates orbit around each other in complex social galaxies. Jessica Moore, the most popular girl in the junior class, held court at the center table, her laughter commanding attention. Tyler Jenkins, basketball star and Jessica's boyfriend, draped his arm possessively around her shoulders. Emily's thoughts drifted to Richard, wondering if he was warm enough with just one blanket. December in Chicago showed no mercy. "Earth to weirdo," came a sharp voice, snapping Emily back to reality. Jessica stood over her, perfect eyebrows raised in amusement. "You were staring, it's creepy." Heat rushed to Emily's face. "Sorry, I was just thinking." "About what?" "How to be less of a nobody." Jessica's friends tittered behind her. "Seriously, Parker, do you even exist outside of school? Does anyone even notice you?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "Jess, come on." But Jessica wasn't finished. "I mean, what do you even do? Who are you?" The questions hung in the air, rhetorical, daggers meant to wound, not to actually learn anything. Emily gathered her untouched lunch and stood. "I help people," she said quietly, surprising herself with the response. "People who need it." Jessica's laughter followed her out of the cafeteria. "Right, Saint Emily of the Losers." That evening, Emily found herself returning to the train tracks with an extra sandwich she'd made in secret. Richard wasn't just coughing now. He was burning with fever, his breathing labored. "You should see a doctor," she said, panic rising in her throat. Richard shook his head. "No insurance, no ID," he whispered between coughs. "Hospitals ask too many questions." Emily sat with him as darkness fell, her mind racing. There had to be something she could do, someone who would help. But who listens to a 16-year-old nobody about a homeless man nobody wanted to see? When she finally left, promising to return the next day, Richard grabbed her hand. "Wait," he said, struggling to sit upright. He reached into his layers of clothing and pulled out a small notebook. "Take this, keep it safe." Emily opened it to find pages of intricate diagrams, mathematical equations, and notes written in a precise, educated hand. "What is this?" "Who I was," he whispered, "before I became invisible." That night Emily couldn't sleep. Richard's notebook sat on her desk, its pages filled with complex physics formulas and references to quantum theories she'd only vaguely heard about in school. One name appeared repeatedly in the margins: Keller Institute of Advanced Physics. Beside it were the initials RAM. Emily slipped out of bed and powered up her ancient computer, the fan whirring loudly in the quiet apartment. She searched. Keller Institute and RAM. The results made her heart stop. Dr. Richard Anthony Matthews, renowned theoretical physicist, disappeared 7 years ago after suffering a mental breakdown following his wife's death. Presumed dead. But he wasn't dead. He was living behind a dumpster near train tracks in Chicago, and he was very sick. What if nobody else would ever know? What if he died there, alone and forgotten? The thought was unbearable. Emily printed the article, her hands shaking. She had to do something. But what could someone like her possibly do? The next morning, Emily skipped school for the first time in her life. Martha had already left for her cleaning job, and George was sleeping off his night shift. No one would notice her absence until the automated school call came that evening. By then, she hoped, it wouldn't matter. She took 3 buses to reach the gleaming glass building of the Keller Institute in Chicago's University District. Her heart pounded as she approached the security desk, clutching Richard's notebook and the printed article like lifelines. "I need to speak with someone about Dr. Matthews," she said, her voice barely audible. The guard looked her up and down, taking, in her worn coat, her scuffed shoes, her obvious youth, "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but—" "Then I suggest you make one and come back when you're accompanied by an adult," he said dismissively, already looking past her to the next person. Emily stood her ground. "It's about Richard Matthews. He's alive." Those words changed everything. Within an hour, Emily sat in a conference room surrounded by serious-faced scientists and a tearful woman introduced as Dr. Sarah Collins, Richard's former research partner. They pored over the notebook, asking Emily dozens of questions about the man she knew only as Mr. Richard. "This equation," Dr. Collins said, pointing to a page. "Only Richard would approach the problem this way. This is his work, his brilliance." She looked at Emily with wonder. "Where is he now?" "He needs help," Emily said firmly. "Medical help. First, he's very sick." What followed was a whirlwind. A private ambulance dispatched to the location Emily described. Richard, barely conscious, being carefully transported to a private medical facility. Emily, standing awkwardly in the waiting room, suddenly feeling out of place in this unfolding drama of important people and second chances. "You should go home," a kind nurse suggested after several hours. "Your parents must be worried." Emily nodded, though she knew better. They wouldn't be worried. They'd be angry about the school call, annoyed by the disruption to their routine. She had just turned to leave when Dr. Collins emerged from the treatment area. "Emily, wait," she called. "Richard is stabilized. Pneumonia. Malnutrition exposure, but he'll recover." Her eyes shone with tears and gratitude. "He's asking for you." Richard lay propped up in the hospital bed, looking small beneath the white sheets but already more substantial somehow. Recognition flickered in his eyes when Emily entered. "You found them," he said softly. Emily nodded. "Your equations gave you away." A ghost of his old smile appeared. "Always too clever for my own good." He reached for her hand. "Why did you help me? All these years?" Emily considered the question. "Because you always said thank you like you meant it," she finally answered. "And because sometimes I feel invisible too." Understanding passed between them, a current of recognition that needed no further words. December unfurled in a series of revelations. Richard Matthews wasn't just any physicist. He had been on the verge of breakthrough work when tragedy and mental illness derailed his life. The scientific community had mourned him, then moved on. Now they celebrated his resurrection with the fervor of the truly repentant. Emily visited him daily after school, watching as color returned to his face and clarity to his mind. He introduced her to colleagues, to concepts that made her mind expand, to a world where curiosity was currency and knowledge was power. For the first time, Emily felt her own potential unfurling like a map of possibilities. Martha and George noticed the change in her, her sudden interest in physics books, her animated dinner conversations, the mysterious phone calls from people with letters after their names. They regarded these developments with suspicion rather than pride. "You've been different," Martha commented one evening, her thin lips pursed. "Secretive." "I've made a friend," Emily offered cautiously. George snorted. "A boyfriend? Is that where this is going? Because you're too young and we won't have any of that nonsense." "Not a boyfriend," Emily said. "A mentor. Someone who believes in me." The words hung in the air, an unintended indictment of all they had failed to provide. On Christmas Eve, Emily sat with Richard in his new apartment, modest but comfortable, provided by the Institute while he recovered and reintegrated. They drank hot chocolate and watched the snow fall outside the window. "I've been thinking," Richard said slowly, "about your future." Emily looked up, curious. "You have an exceptional mind, Emily. I've seen how quickly you grasp concepts that confound my graduate students." He set down his mug. "The Institute has a scholarship program for gifted students. I've recommended you." Emily's heart raced. "But I'm just extraordinary," Richard finished firmly, "and it's time someone told you so." Later that night, walking home through gently falling snow, Emily felt lighter than she had in years. Someone had seen her, truly seen her, and found value in what they discovered. It was a gift beyond measure. The next morning, Christmas Day, Emily awoke to the unusual sound of the doorbell. Martha called from the living room, her voice sharp with confusion. "Emily, there are people here for you." Wrapping her robe tightly around herself, Emily emerged to find Richard standing in their cramped living room. Beside him stood Dr. Collins and an elegant older man introduced as the director of the Keller Institute. Martha and George hovered, uncertainly, clearly intimidated by the unexpected guests in expensive winter coats bearing wrapped packages. "Merry Christmas, Emily," Richard said warmly. "We couldn't wait to share the news." The director stepped forward, extending an envelope. "The scholarship committee met yesterday in special session. It's unprecedented, but then so is your situation." He smiled. "Congratulations, Emily. You've been awarded a full scholarship to our advanced studies program starting next semester." Martha gasped. George's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. "That's not all," Dr. Collins added, placing a large gift box on their worn coffee table. "This is from all of us. The tools you'll need to succeed." Inside was a brand new laptop, scientific calculators, and books. So many books, their spines gleaming with promise. "And this," Richard said softly, handing Emily a small box, "is just from me." Inside lay a delicate silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a star. "To remind you that even invisible things contain light," he whispered, "just waiting to be discovered. Have you ever felt invisible only to be truly seen by someone who recognized your worth? I'd love to hear your story in the comments." Martha and George watched in stunned silence as their quiet, unremarkable adopted daughter transformed before their eyes into someone of consequence, someone with a future beyond their imagination. The realization of what they had failed to nurture sat heavily between them. "We didn't know," Martha finally said, her voice small. "You never asked," Emily replied, not unkindly. It wasn't an accusation, merely a truth finally spoken. In the days that followed, Emily's world expanded like a universe after the Big Bang. The scholarship meant transfer to a school affiliated with the Institute, where minds like hers were treasured rather than overlooked. Richard continued to recover, his brilliant mind reconnecting with his life's work, with Emily often by his side as both student and reminder of what truly mattered. Martha and George struggled to adjust to this new reality where their adopted daughter had advocates and opportunities beyond their understanding. There were awkward dinners with Richard, hesitant questions about Emily's studies, fumbling attempts to bridge the chasm their indifference had created. "Will you leave us?" George asked one evening, the question revealing fears he'd never before acknowledged. Emily considered this as she worked through a complex problem set at the kitchen table. "Not yet," she said honestly, "but someday I will go to university, probably far from here." "Because we weren't good to you," Martha stated flatly. Emily set down her pencil. "Because that's what children do, they grow up and follow their paths. But I'm not leaving because of you. I'm leaving towards something, not away from anyone." It was the kindest truth she could offer, and perhaps the most generous gift, absolution they hadn't earned but desperately needed. Winter melted into spring. Emily bloomed, her confidence growing alongside her knowledge. The girl who had once been invisible now shone with purpose, moving through the world with the certainty of someone who knew her own value. On the anniversary of the day she'd found Richard's notebook, they stood together on the observation deck of Chicago's tallest building. The city spread beneath them like a galaxy of lights. "I've been thinking about invisibility," Emily said thoughtfully. "About how we choose what we see and what we ignore." Richard nodded, understanding as always. The universe is filled with invisible forces that shape everything: gravity, magnetism, quantum fields. We don't see them directly, but they're the most powerful things that exist. He smiled at her. "Some people are like that too." "Is that what you were working on before?" "In a way," Richard admitted. "I was trying to prove that consciousness itself might be a fundamental force in the universe, as essential as gravity or electromagnetism, that our attention, our care, our recognition of each other might literally shape reality." Emily contemplated this. "Then when I noticed you might have changed the universe," he finished with a gentle laugh. "Or at least my universe." "And you changed mine," Emily said simply. Below them, Chicago continued its rhythmic pulse of life. Millions of stories unfolding simultaneously, countless invisible moments of kindness or cruelty, shaping the fabric of existence. Emily thought of the girl she had been a year ago, giving small gifts to a forgotten man, never imagining how that simple act of seeing would ripple outward, transforming everything. It wasn't just that Richard had opened doors for her, though. He had. It wasn't just that she now had opportunities beyond her wildest dreams, though she did. It was that she understood now, truly understood, that invisibility was always temporary, that even the smallest acts of kindness could illuminate the darkest corners, that everyone deserved to be seen. Martha and George were trying in their limited way to see her now. Richard was regaining his place in the world he'd lost. And Emily, once just a shadow at the edges of other people's awareness, stood firmly at the center of her own life, radiating possibility. "Ready to head back?" Richard asked as the spring breeze ruffled their hair. Emily took one last look at the shimmering city. "Yes," she said, feeling the weight of the star pendant against her skin. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." And as they turned to leave, Emily knew with absolute certainty that she would never again pass by someone without truly seeing them. Because that was the real gift, not what she had received, but what she had learned to give. The profound power of recognition, of bearing witness, of refusing to let another human being remain invisible. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story, on this same channel.